From being bullied, leading to non-purge bulimia and a diagnosis of bipolar, to living a life that you can be proud of. Welcome back to another episode of Irrepressible, ordinary people with extraordinary resilience. And in today's episode, I speak to the man well known as Mindset by Dave. Now, Dave's story is a pretty incredible one, and what I really enjoyed about this interview is how Dave talks about his struggles that he had growing up with those diagnoses of bipolar, his non-purge bulimia, perhaps more importantly, the systems that Dave has used to get to the life that he has today. Dave absolutely has a way with words. He has a way of explaining his experiences in a way that gives you wisdom to be able to implement in your own life. Sit back, hold tight. This is an incredible journey, and there's lots to take in and lots to use in your life. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. And if this is the first time that you've ever been here, make sure that you've subscribed and you've turned on those notifications so you know each and every time a new video is posted. Dave, how you doing, mate? It's a real pleasure to have you on today. How are you?
I'm really good. It's always a pleasure to chat to you, so I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, me and you met through Instagram, I think, right? That's when we originally met.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and then we've had a really good conversation on your podcast, which people should go and check out, and it'll be linked in the comments after this. But rather than me introducing you, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, I'll try and do the intro without actually answering the talk about the adversity. Who I am now. I'll go with who I am now, and then we can dip into who I was, I suppose. Good. Who I am now is I operate online under the name Mindset by Dave. I am a neurolinguistic programming coach, training to be a cognitive behavioral therapist. Basically someone who loves mental health, loves educating people around mental health. I don't particularly love mental health because I live with it, and it's I love it when I do, and I don't when I don't, you know. And I'm someone who's basically been through a lot with my own mental health, been through a lot with my own physical health, and my obsession is basically to help other people. Well, it says on the back of this t-shirt, I'm wearing master the mind, master anything, and that's where I want to get to. Really, it's like I particularly love helping the people that aren't at the sort of top of the motivation chain. You know, not the person that's already highly motivated and wants that extra 5%, but the person who really struggles, like the person who I was and have been at various points through my life. I love doing that, and I aim to try and make mental health education accessible to one and all.
Good, and you do a great job of it, genuinely. I know it's easy for me to say that sat in front of you, but I'm a big fan of certainly your Instagram stuff. Follow it pretty regularly, so it's good. And I'm looking forward to what we're going to talk about today in the short time that we do have. So why don't we kick it straight off, and you tell me about the adversity you faced that meant that you had to be resilient.
Okay, so I really struggled with this question to narrow it down to one adversity. So, but what I've actually thought about is it's a bunch of adversities that are all underpinned by the same thing. And that was the adversity started off with my brother and my dad picking on me when I was, 5, 6 years old. My dad left when I was 6 years old, so it must have been before that as well. They were still at home, and they used to pretend that I was invisible and literally pretend that they couldn't hear me. And the more noise I made, the more they just now, as a kid, that probably only lasted about 10 minutes. But as a kid, time's this weird dilated thing, isn't it? That as a child, the 6-week summer holiday seemed to last forever now back then. And now 6 weeks has gone in a blink of an eye. So it probably wasn't all day, but it felt like my entire reality back at the time. And I think the adversity I think that I struggled with, occasionally still struggle with on my days where I'm not going to say my weaker days, I'm going to say my tougher days, because I'm a very big believer that we are not weak, the journey is just difficult. And that is low self-esteem. And I think it came from that. I grew up with the belief that I wasn't enough, but specifically my belief was that I'm invisible. So I put on an absolute ton of weight, try and make myself more visible, started wearing bright colors, make myself more visible, grew out my big long curly hair, all of that stuff did. But put my hand up in class, which was the next part about it. Put my hand up in class because I knew the answers to questions. Now, I went to the 14th worst school in the country, which is, I think it's quite a miracle that I actually know how to do 2 + 2. But as a result, because I knew the answers to questions in that school, I put a target on my back and I was I was picked on. I don't know if anyone can tell from my accent. It's not a very thick accent, but I grew up in Anfield in Liverpool. Not the stadium, the district, although I could hear the match by sticking my head out the window. And I was bullied. And then obviously, at the back of being bullied, I developed an eating disorder. I developed non-purge bulimia, which then led to me then further on becoming very, very overweight, and then getting picked on, not just for the fact that I put my hand up in class, but getting picked on for my weight. My family was amazingly poor at that time as well. Got picked on for not having the right pair of kickers or the right pair of Rockports a couple of years later, all that stuff. And I wouldn't say that did certainly give me a resilience, because you have to have a certain resilience to get through those things. But I was diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder at 14, like right in the midst of all of this. And I would say there was nothing that I personally did that overcame that part of my life. We moved out of Liverpool. We moved only 45 minutes down the road to Southport. And in Southport, I had a shaved head and a Scouse accent. So no one came near me. No one was going to bother trying to pick on me. They all thought I was terrifying. And I made a bunch of friends, and my environment changed. So I kind of cruised for a little bit of time there, but that low self-esteem was still there. And a couple of years later, I basically got engaged to the first girl that said yes to going out with me, like 10 months into the relationship, got married by the age of 20. And it was on the fast track to try and just have that adult life. I never really had my childhood. I was on this fast track to have my adult life, which, apart from getting 2 kids out of the whole process, which I would never change any of this because of them. It just led to me just feeling like not enough, feeling like I was a terrible person, feeling like I didn't deserve love, all of the rest of this. And I screwed up my first marriage. And that kind of went back and forth for a couple of years until I left that marriage, indefinitely, and ended up in a relationship with someone who, well, we were both completely and utterly horrible to each other. We were both completely wrong for each other. Both these kind of fiery, passionate kind of people that, like love when they love and argue when they argue and that type of thing. But her big thing was that she would isolate me from everybody else. And I would do anything for her because I thought my self-esteem came from her. So I ended up cutting myself off from friends, family, everyone, in order to try and be with this person. And then the relationship ended, and she left. And then I felt, okay, I've done everything to kind of be with this person, and then this person doesn't even want to be with me. And now I've got nothing. I didn't have her, and I didn't have my family. I wasn't speaking to any of my family except for my kids. And my kids at the time were 5 and 3, or 4 and 2 actually at that point. And even then, that led to an attempted suicide 11 years ago. I looked at this picture from V Festival. It was like 1 year ago today. Facebook can be really good for you if that brings up a good memory and you're in a good place. If it brings up a good memory and you're in a terrible place. 1 year ago today, there was a picture from V Festival. I was with my first wife. I was with about 14 of my mates, all kind of doing a stupid pose for a big group photo where we'd been having an absolute whale of the time. And then I compared that to where I was in that moment, feeling just completely isolated, not speaking to any of my family, not speaking to any of my friends. I'm feeling like I was a complete and utter waste of space for my kids, really. And what that led to me thinking was that my kids deserve better. And if anyone's listened to this that's never felt suicidal, you'll probably just think, well, just be better then. But my brain at that point was saying, no, my kids deserve better. And the only way they're going to get better, it's not going to come from you because you're useless. You're a waste of space. You're always going to be like this. The only thing that's going to, the only way they're going to get a better dad is if you get out of the way. And that was, what led me to not want to be here anymore. And so I made an attempt on my own life. Thankfully, this is the one thing in life I'm so glad to have failed at, and then I'd love to say that turned it around, but what actually really turned it around was a few weeks later. And this was back when I think there was probably still Blockbuster Video, still delivering DVDs by the mail at this point, rather than even Netflix. And I was trying to kind of I was always trying to better myself, but even though I didn't quite nail it, I was trying to learn French, and I thought, I'll just put a bunch of French films on my Blockbuster list. And this French film called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly came, and I was just literally there wasting time, lying on the couch with a duvet over me, just kind of watching films to numb myself, really. And this film came on, and it's a true story about a guy with locked-in syndrome who managed to write a book by communicating with a nurse via blinks. And he's there. He's got these 2 kids, and he's down at the beach with them. He's basically in the wheelchair. He's got all the tubes attached to him. Can literally only just watch. And it says this line that I realized that even a fragment, even a sliver, a shadow of a dad is still a dad. And that one moment literally turned my life around, because I decided at that point, my kids deserve better. And instead of it me hearing, like, let's make room for someone better to emerge, I at that moment thought I could be that man. And I went on to try and literally better myself in every area, bettering myself physically, bettering myself mentally, rebuilding the bridges with friends and all of those sorts of things, like accepting the bridges that I probably couldn't rebuild, because there were some friendships that were lost for good out of all of that. Rebuilding, rebuilding those bridges with friends, rekindling sort of relationships with family. And I made a sort of devotion to myself to I said I was going to spend a year of my life single, because I'd never been, from the second that I got a girlfriend, 6 days after my 17th birthday, I was incapable of being single, and all of my worth came from somebody else. And it was, and basically I said I was going to spend a year being single. I managed, like, I don't know, 9 months or so before meeting the woman who I celebrated my 10-year anniversary with 8 days ago. But even then, I still hung my self-esteem on her. And this is the big thing that it took me a few years. It was only when I was doing my NLP qualification that all of this kind of finally came together for me. Because when I was doing that, I'd been through various forms of therapy. I'd been through various forms of self-help. Certain bits had helped, certain bits hadn't. But by going through this coaching qualification, because I wanted to help others, I realized that helping others was one of the things that brought me extreme happiness, which, as you all know, when you first do it, it's totally and utterly a deflection so that you don't have to work on yourself. Nowadays, I'm happy to say that I work on myself in parallel whilst working. I will always work on myself in parallel whilst working on helping other people. But it really gave me this sort of purpose. But the training itself was like another light bulb moment. And it was like, hang on a minute, what, self-esteem? I looked for it from my dad, didn't get it. Looked for it from my brother, didn't get it. When I was a personal trainer at this point, and like I was looking to people like Ben Coomber and stuff, who were my kind of mentors, and any single time that they sort of said, well done to me, I was like putty in their hands, I was like, oh, thank you so much. It was like a little drug to me. I absolutely, utterly craved men thinking I was awesome, men thinking I've done a good job. A man telling me he's proud of me, of what he's done, that Ben's like 3 years younger than me, but that still felt like I had, well, let's just put it in a box and say I had daddy issues. And it was that point that I'm like, you know what, I've been putting my self-esteem, the responsibility for my self-esteem on absolutely everybody else, and that low self-esteem is what has caused all of this. It's not necessarily caused all of this. Maybe it was a product of it. Maybe it was both, but ultimately it underpinned everything. And it's like, we often talk about the different, the idea of a victim mentality and stuff. And it's a very taboo topic, because I was still living in that victimhood. I was still living in that idea that, I'm not worth it. If everyone treats me badly because there must be something wrong with me. And honestly, I made a huge shift in that and decided that, the only person's approval that I need is mine. That's the person whose approval I've been craving all this time. So a compliment will give me that little hit, like a drug, for like 10 minutes, if I'm lucky, it's like, and then I'll be like, right, what can I do to get the next compliment? What can I do to get the next compliment? And you know what? You can always give yourself a compliment. And going through that training, in particular, realizing that I'd been trying to be visible my entire life because of my dad making me feel like I was invisible. It shifted everything for me, because I like to I call it perform on stage. I actually am an educator, but I prefer to make it performative. I like to put jokes in there. I like to make it a little bit theatrical. I want it to be memorable. I love it, and I absolutely love it. But I was dependent on that. There's no way I would have survived the last 16 weeks if my self-esteem hadn't have been sorted out. Sorted out to a level. It's still not perfect. It's getting there. Cool. But there's no way that with the last 16 weeks, without being able to use the stage as that outlet, before I needed that. I needed one of those a month at least, just to keep my self-esteem ticking. And again, it still wasn't. I was outsourcing my self-esteem. So that's kind of where it is now. the whole lockdowns period made me kind of had to reassess all of that, because not being able to be in a room with people and get that feedback, and you know what it's like doing a presentation over Zoom. It has its pros and cons. It's like, when you finish, you click close, and the camera pans down, and you're wearing your finest pair of tracky bottoms, and then you're done, and all the rest of it. But I missed being in the room and having those conversations with people and getting that approval. So I realized that there's still, we get sort of comfortable resting on, I've got my self-esteem all sorted out here, but I think there's still a little bit of a way to go. But on the whole, I make sure it's my approval that I'm getting every day, not anybody else's.
Yeah, that last bit really resonates for me. I went through, when I first started doing what I do and delivering, when you're delivering in person and you're speaking on a stage in front of people, if you've spoken at an event with a couple of hundred people there, or more even, or even less, even when it's less, right? When you come home to your, in my case, my wife and my children, sometimes when they say you're brilliant, it doesn't quite feel the same as when 500 people have just been queuing to tell you you're brilliant afterwards. Do you know what I mean? And it gets so easy to get hooked on that.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a comparison thing as well, isn't it? Because at first, I very much liken it to drugs or alcohol. At first you need 100%. That one, you need that one drink to get you hit, and then eventually it's like you need an entire bottle. And that's the whole thing, is like that. I just thought this feels good, and it feels good because I'm getting compliments, and I didn't realize just how much I became dependent on it. And you're dependent on it when because you're trying to overcome a deep personal insecurity by other people's opinions. Also makes you extremely vulnerable to trolls and criticism, because it only takes one of them for every 100 compliments you get to kind of ruin your day. And to do what we do, if you're not getting at least one troll, then that probably means that you're not doing it. You're not doing it as well as you could.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, people disagree with everything.
Yeah, definitely online, especially when if you have any kind of following online. I think particularly some people struggle with that. I think I never knew your story. I never knew how similar our stories are. So very similar. Particularly the thing with your children, and that that was going to take your own life, and because you felt like your kids would be better without you. And I think that's one of the reasons why we lose a lot of men. I think that a lot of men think like that when they reach that stage. They think that the best thing for my children is for me not to be here. I hate myself, and so my children are only ever going to hate me.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you're valuing yourself, is if you think of yourself like the depression, well, particularly suicide. I don't know if you ever come across Beck's triad, but it's like a psychological theory that talks about like once a person goes even beyond depression to being suicidal, and it's 3 lies, 3 distortions that we tell ourselves. Number 1 is that we're a terrible person. So the first lie is always about yourself. The second one is about the world, and the world is a terrible place. And the third one is that it's always going to be like this. And everyone I've spoken to pretty much that has been to the point of considering taking their own lives has felt that way. And the third one in particular, the always going to be like this, it's like, when you've got to hold on to something for 5 minutes, it's not particularly heavy. When you've got to hold on to something for 5 hours, it gets really heavy. When you've got to hold on to something for forever, we're not thinking in that moment that this will pass. This moment is, I don't need to survive just this moment. I need to survive forever. And we can't handle that all at one time. But going back to that first one, it's like, if you believe that you're a truly worthless person, then you don't see the worth that other people place in you. And that's kind of almost a weird reversal that I've literally only just twigged on for the first time. It's like all that time I've just said about, it's about, your opinion of you and your value of you. It is about that, because in that moment, the whole world could think you're absolutely marvelous, and it doesn't matter. We only have to sort of look at Robin Williams. He was one of the most beloved people in the whole world, and he still didn't see that for himself.
Do you think a lot of the way that you felt are linked to what you experienced with your dad and your brother? Would you call that bullying?
I don't know. I find it really hard to place, because knowing that, I lost my dad, actually fully lost him when I was 19, and me and my brother have never really had a great relationship. I think there was a clear sort of favoritism in the family, which was like, I think I kind of got lucky in a way, because I was mum's favorite. Teams. When my mum and dad got divorced, that was the first point in which this was clearly obvious, because in that moment when they were having that final fight before my dad left, my brother went to my dad and I went to my mum. And that is kind of such a kind of pivotal moment of how things went forever, until my brother fell out with my dad 2 years before he died. And then my dad suddenly was like, my dad was suddenly, oh, I've got another son. Let's say, and this is the whole thing. I think one thing I'm really lucky to have is, despite all of that story, I think underpinned with all of that is I am a very grateful person. Like, I'm super grateful for the fact, instead of thinking I had 17 years of my life without my dad, in fact, I've now had another 19 of now, like, since then. But I've had 21 years of my life without my dad, 17 of which were sort of by his choice. I'm actually grateful for the 2 years I had. So to call it, I wouldn't necessarily call it bullying, because I don't think they knew the effect it was having. I think a bully, well, not a bully needs to know at least it's having some effect, obviously, but I don't think bullies ever truly know the full extent of the effect. But I think that was just me and mum had our little club, and my dad and Lee had their little club. And I don't think this is what I see so much with my work, is that people often get into kind of these beliefs about themselves because they've been passed on in often quite innocuous ways. Mine's somewhere kind of, around the middle in terms of what I've heard, in terms of how people have picked up those beliefs about themselves. I've heard people with absolutely full-on traumatic experiences pick up beliefs, but I've also heard people with it's hard to compare anyone's trauma to anyone's trauma, but I've had people that have picked up that belief of one very brief instance, and when we get to that, we can kind of, and it can be something that a parent said really in passing. It really makes me, learning all this stuff from my work really made me kind of stop and take pause and think about how I parent my kids myself, because there are things that, if you like, for example, like one that I heard was about like a person that came home and they got an A on their maths test, and the dad was like, well, yeah, we know you're good at maths. And that was it. So it's almost like a half compliment. That led that person to becoming a lifelong perfectionist, never feeling like anything was ever good enough. It's like, well, all I wanted dad to say in that moment was well done. And it's like, I'm like, oh my God, when I had that call with that person, like as soon as I came off it, I'm like, I need to speak to my eldest when he gets home from school, because I totally said the exact same thing to him, and I thought I was giving him a compliment. So I don't think they were doing it in a mean-spirited way. Obviously I can compare them to the bullies I had in school, who very much were, the absolute worst thing, I got surrounded by like about 20 people while one person force fed me grass once. There's no way that wasn't done with a mean spirit, and so that's the whole, and I suppose it's about comparison, isn't it? And like that's why I struggle with that, because it's very hard to, especially in my job and trying to kind of be a parent and all that. The last thing you want to do, because I've been through those different layers of trauma, I personally put mine on a sort of ranking system, and it's like it's not projecting that onto other people, which is like, again, it's an ongoing task, that, because if someone tells you something, if someone says I'm being bullied and this is what's happening, my instinct would be to turn around and say that's not bullying. I would never say that to a person, but it's like, because again, I suppose, well, bullying is in the eye of the person being bullied, isn't it?
Of course,
if you see it as being bullying, then your definition of bullying, it is being bullied. I don't personally define it that way. I think they were just being he was being a pair of idiots having a little boys club.
Yeah, and it just happened to have that impact on you, like you say. I think these kind of, and this, like, I think so many of when I speak to people about trauma, and the people that I work with, they say I had great parents, and I say, I always say, great parents can leave can cause trauma in you, right? It's nothing to do with, or sometimes it is, but it's not always to do with bad parenting or deliberate acts or anything like that. Do you know what I mean? Some of the impacts I know that I would have had on my children have come from that loving place of, just like you said, you've done it to your own son, so then you had to quickly go and say to him about the maths thing, right? You said exactly the same thing. It's so often that it's not the case that people are meaning to do it even.
But it can absolutely
have the impact.
It's like why I mean I absolutely love all the work you're doing at the minute on talking about the need to be permanently positive. You know, you could get brought up by a parent who is just the most positive influence in the whole world, but that person never really allows you to sit with those more negative emotions. And I try personally not to refer to emotions as positive or negative. I try to refer to them as appropriate. Like, is it the, like, you know, because it's is being, you know, in the moment of, let's say, a funeral, running in and being all kind of sunshine, lollipops and roses at that particular moment, that's considered to be a positive emotion, but it's not an appropriate emotion when there's a bunch of mourners there. You know, it's an appropriate emotion to grieve.
Yeah.
And each of our interpretations as well is like, it's what's appropriate to you. Like, it's what, you know, honoring whatever emotion turns up. That person who's permanently positive isn't going to necessarily do that. And like, as you know, you and I have talked about in the past, it's, you know, that person's often trying to move you away from that emotion because they personally don't want to sit with it. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
And that parent could just, you know, if you were to see a snapshot of that parent on TV or something, you'd think, oh, they're the perfect parent. Oh, that's the person I want to be like. And yeah, that can cause trauma because that child could maybe have lost someone, you know, in that period and never been actually allowed to grieve because it's like, you know, this is how we deal with things. And it's one of those fine lines because you want to help your kids understand how to deal with things. But at the same time, you also need to let them figure out how to deal with things. And figuring that exact sweet spot out is if anyone tells you that they've done it, they're lying.
Or their kids have grown up, because that's probably the time when you start to work it out.
Yeah, well, when you can sit, I mean, my eldest is 15, and I love the fact that we can actually have these conversations about these things now. He's quite in tune about it, and to be honest, as well, like I'll be honest about the fact that I work in schools and stuff, and I figured as well last year that I've got far more patience with the kids that I only meet once when we're doing a seminar or whatever than I do with my own kids. And you know, there is obviously reasons to all that. Those kids haven't spent 15 years knowing exactly where my buttons are. But ultimately, it's trying to kind of think, right, well, I have an effect with those kids. And so why do I think that, like, being a bit more rushing through it or being a bit more impatient with my own son, it's like, it's actually going to get the outcome that I'm trying to help him find. But he's watched enough of my videos, and if I do something that he knows that I can do better, he'll call me out on it. He'll call me out. He called me out the other day saying, you know, because I was trying to help him with some perspective about some of the things that I've been through when I was younger. And he just turned around and he said, you do realize that when you just did that, you completely invalidated everything that I was just saying about mine? And I was like, yeah, you're kind of right, aren't you?
Yeah, when they throw it at you.
Yeah.
So I'm a little bit conscious of time, and I think, like, you know, it's difficult to kind of break down such a long and sort of powerful story that you've packed into the time that we've got. What would you say, if you could pick out the key things, what would you say were the key things that enabled you to be resilient in the way that you have been, clearly?
Yeah. Okay. One of the most impactful things for me, and I got seriously lucky on this one, is the fact that a new doctor appeared at the surgery that I went to, and he realized that my case had been kind of just left dangling the last time I'd gone for a medication review, and it had just been left. Like the medication hadn't been reviewed. I'd then not turned up for something. It was a mess. And then I was just like, well, I'm just going to crack on with this. And I got this new doctor randomly turned up, and I don't think I'd have gone specifically and asked for this, but he was keen on talking therapies in particular, this was before CBT got as popular as it is now. He basically pushed me into a mindfulness course with a mental health primary carer, not mental hair. We all have mental hair for a little bit during lockdown, but yeah, so with a mental health primary carer, and I think I saw her for like 6 times over 12 weeks, like every other week for probably only about 20 minutes. And I'm just a really good obliger me. So she set me homework to do certain things, and I went off and did it. People need to set me homework. You know, that's the one problem about running my own business, is no one sets me homework. I'll say no to myself. But she basically taught me mindfulness, well, had me teach myself mindfulness, but she was the first person to teach me the expression, this too shall pass. Because growing up, my experience with bipolar disorder, I was told, and it was called manic depression when I was diagnosed, but I was told that basically it means that you live at one or two of the extremes, which can be true for some people, but there's a lot of people with bipolar disorder that actually spend time in the middle. But if you're told that you're going to live at both of these extremes, then you kind of confirmation bias rejects all the times that you're in the middle. And for me, the two beliefs, and these beliefs contradict each other, but the two beliefs I had about my condition was when I was low, I felt it's always going to be like this. And when I was high, I felt like, well, this is going to come crashing down. So I'd almost talk myself out of the highs, and I'd never ride them out the way that I do carefully to these days, because the highs in bipolar can be just as harmful to you as the lows. They just feel a lot better. And then obviously my belief was that this low period was going to last forever. And going back to that thing before, if we believe it's forever, then it's so much harder. It's very easy to be resilient with something when you know that you don't have to be resilient with it every second of your life for the next, forever. I say it's very easy. It's much easier. It would be a better way to say that. And so learning that was good because it changed my belief from like my depressions would last forever. And honestly, it genuinely changed how long my depressions last, because yes, mental health is a combination of what happens to you and what you do to yourself. There are people like to sit in one camp or the other. You get the super positive people that are just like, yeah, mental health is totally conquerable 100% of the time. And then you get the super kind of the opposite side of it. I don't want to call them the negative people, but the people that, that's the word that does seem to fit in the English language. And it's the people that go, right, well, this is what happens to me and there's nothing I can do to change it. The sort of fatalistic people, there we go, that's a better way to describe that. And the truth is somewhere in the middle for each and every one of us. For some of us, we might be 99% over to this can't be changed. Someone with extreme psychosis or kind of with like dual diagnosis or anything like those things, it's harder for that person to interact with the things that might help. But at the same time, the person that believes that 100% of it can be changed is totally and utterly going to get sent a curveball sooner or later, and they're going to not know how to handle it because their coping strategies haven't been there. I know because I've been at both sides of that pendulum. So I got cocky when I first managed my mental health, all right? And I believed that I had it nailed. I thought, mental health completed it, mate, and learning that. So when it's low now, at least I know that I'm not going to handle that forever. And when it's high now, I don't tell myself it's going to come crashing down. I don't anticipate the fall, but I basically say, this is going to pass. Let's just make sure while we're here, we're safe. And, because I think I'm indestructible when I'm at the top, which is, it sounds like a great belief to have, but it's not. It's the type of belief that, someone, if they go too far with it, could believe that they can't be hurt, which can lead to kind of dangerous or unsafe behavior. So yeah, and again, going back in time, coupling that with drugs, already feeling manic and then putting drugs in the equation, thinking that you're indestructible, really bad idea. But yeah, so that one piece of advice, it sounds so trite. It's because it gets thrown around a hell of a lot. And the other one that sounds so trite that gets thrown around a hell of a lot is the phrase "you are enough." I love that phrase. But when I use that phrase, I'm not saying you are the finished product that you're ever going to be. I'm not saying that this is the best it's ever going to be, which a lot of people say that and then they reject it because they think, well, I want to be better in certain areas. What it means is you are enough for who you are in this moment right now. And that has to be true because we can't go back and change the way things are. So we can't suddenly be better for now. We can still be better later. That doesn't mean we're more valuable as a person because we're better. That doesn't mean we need to be better. There's a dependency on it. It just means if we want to be better, if we want to make better videos or have better conversations or make better content to help people better, that's all cool. And in fact, if you do that from a position of thinking that you're already good enough, and be open to the idea of change, like both you and I are, that's why we have such great conversations. It's like, be open to the idea that, things can change your mind, things can help you evolve along the way, that you'll be good enough for tomorrow, and then you'll be good enough for the next day and the next day, and whatever life throws at you.
Yeah. Incredible, incredible. And lastly, I guess you probably covered quite a lot of this, to be honest with you. But what would you say that you've learned about yourself through everything? I suppose you could probably write a book on this, and I suppose your Instagram page covers like so much of it. But
my Instagram page is a book. You know, a picture says 1,000 words, so I don't know why I put 1,000 words with every one of my pictures. What have I learned about myself? Going back to that, I really just want to echo that whole, the only person whose approval you need is your own.
Yeah, I love that.
That changed things for me a lot because, like, if one of my kids, like, you know, you have to discipline your kids every now and then. I had to do it with mine yesterday. He got really, really sarcastic about wearing a face mask when I was trying to take him for ice cream. It's like trying to do a nice thing, so no ice cream. It's like if you're not gonna put a face mask on for 5 seconds because it's uncomfortable, then okay, no ice cream. And I hated that, absolutely hated that, because I've got 2 of them, and the other one was wearing his mask. You know, and this again isn't me having a particular opinion on face masks. This is just me playing by the rules. And you know, basically, when I have to do that, I would think to myself, I would constantly obsess over whether I'm being a good enough dad, whether I've made the right choice, and all the rest of it. And it's like, okay, well, whose approval am I looking for here? Well, I'm looking for my own approval. Sam's not going to give me my approval on whether I'm a good dad in that situation, because he's just missed out on ice cream. And we had a great chat about it last night and sat down and explained it. And he was like, well, I was just making a joke. And I'm like, yeah, but you made it in a really sarcastic tone after you'd just argued with me. So we're talking about the context of it all. And we finally understood it, and we kind of saw eye to eye in the end. But he was never going to see that naturally without, you know, he was just going to, all he's seeing is dad's punished me for something that I thought I was just being funny. Yeah. And it's like, you know, in that situation, like the same, if I have a fight with my wife in the past, it doesn't matter which one of us was right or wrong. It was always me apologizing. And now it's like that, as a result, I would apologize, not because I felt I was wrong, but because I basically didn't feel like, I felt like I needed to pander and I needed to kind of get her approval back in order for me to be happy. And it was a very, you know, strange moment when, you know, I'm a big fan of de-escalating arguments. Basically, it's just all sounding like having self-esteem changed into some sort of knobhead right now, isn't it? But it's like, I am a big, you know, I will always be the first one to kind of try and reinitiate, like, you know, the peace treaty and all the rest of that. But I would torture myself the entire time before that, historically, and the reason I would be doing it wouldn't be because it was the right thing to do. It would be, I wouldn't go and have that further conversation with Sam because it was the right thing to do. I'd do it because I was feeling uncomfortable as a dad. I wouldn't go and sort of, I suppose, start creeping and kind of sucking up to my wife because it was the right thing to do. I'd do it because I was vulnerable in my position as a husband, and I'd lose a lot of sleep over that. And you know, nowadays still feels uncomfortable. I don't like disagreeing with people, obviously, but I feel I know the difference now between when I've just been an absolute tool and things and really need to kind of, you know what, let's kind of suck up the pride and go and admit to this, or when I'm actually vindicated in what I'm doing. And that's a big difference, you know, which again comes into play online when, you know, when you're trying to have conversations online with people, and realizing, like, historically, I may have just apologized to someone for putting a strong opinion out there. Whereas now it's like, well, I don't like the way the mental health industry is, and I do want to change it. Therefore, I have to do things towards the direction of what I want to help change it to, which means having strong opinions, which means disagreeing with people, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave, this has been incredible. We've gone massively over time, but I did predict that we might do that. Just lastly, before we sign off, why don't you, I mean, I'll link it all in the comments, as I've said before, but where's the best place if people want to reach out or connect with you? Where's the best place to do it?
Mindset by Dave everywhere. As we've sort of mentioned Twitter briefly, I'm not mad keen on Twitter, but I do reply. Instagram is kind of my hangout ground, I suppose. But you can do Mindset by Dave on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitch, and a podcast called Master the Mind, Master Anything. So any of those places.
Quality. And I'll link all that in the comments. The podcast is definitely worth a listen. I think our podcast. I did one with you on your podcast.
You did, and it's exceptional.
I think I really would encourage people to go and listen to it. The way that we did it, very quickly, I'll just say it. The way that we did it is you picked out, because it was your podcast, you picked out some of the content that I put online that you disagreed with, and we discussed it all basically, and came to agreements on some parts, and stayed disagreed on others. But we did it in a way that you don't often get to see. That was very compassionate and empathetic, and in a way that helped, I think, to better explore things. So people should go check that out. Is that a fair summary? I
would say so. We had an awesome conversation, and the whole thing, you know what, is like we talk about normalizing the conversation around mental health. Well, normalized conversations can have disagreements in them, and my big thing is, you know, is disagree without disrespecting. I massively respect you and the work that you do, and actually probably see way more eye to eye than I originally even thought as well. And especially since that conversation. And that's what I love about your content. Your content is thought-provoking, and it does, as I said to you when I first reached out, I'm like, it makes me think in ways that other people's content doesn't. Most people that I disagree with, I'm like, yeah, I disagree with that, and I move on. With yours, it's like, I disagree with that, but why do I disagree with that? And what do I feel about that? And that's what good content should be. Good content should make you, should challenge you, should make you question what you already think. Which is a massive credit to you, sir.
Good man, Dave. This has been great. I can't wait to put it out there and share it with everybody. Appreciate you. Appreciate the work that you're doing, and the mental health space will definitely change as a result. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.